All right, here we go. So, welcome to Intermission Orchestra's third arranging workshop lecture. Today, we're going to be talking about the brass section and some music theory. Now, I know music theory last time was a little bit hectic, but luckily, we have a little bit more time to really divulge and ask questions and figure out everything as to what we need to do. I need to let someone in real fast. Hold on a minute. And I'm gonna give Kiki, hi Kiki, I'm gonna make her a co-host so she can let people in for me. Cool. All right, so let's go ahead and get this started. So just a few additions is that I'm a firm believer in the software Transcribe. So if you can get your hands on Transcribe, I would highly recommend it. It's super duper helpful when you're working, I think, with any sort of music. So yeah, Transcribe is awesome. I'm gonna definitely buy it. So yeah. Also, if you are a user of Sibelius, Finale, or Dorco, I would recommend looking into Note Performer 3. It is a add-on software slash sound font that allows for a unique playback experience filled with a lot of good expression. And it's probably the best brass and woodwind sound you can find in any notation software. It is pricey though, but if you have the money on hand, um, or I think there might be a trial version too. So definitely check it out because from what I saw, it looks pretty cool and it can definitely help with your arranging process if you're using Sibelius Finale or Dorco. So let's get on with music theory. Now, one thing I understand about music theory is that it is tough. So at any point, feel free to interject or text the group chat and I'll try and slow down um, because, oh boy, do have stuff to go through. So I should preface by saying that we are mainly focusing on chord theory, which I think is probably the most applicable to our roles as transcribers and arrangers. So there's a couple of terms we do have to know, and we have to kind of work our way into chord theory. So the first term you might want to be familiar with is half step. So that's the movement of an adjacent note. For example, C to C sharp, as you can see on this piano, it would be the movement of just one note to the black keys, or you can hear that, right? Can y'all hear that on the piano? All right, cool. Yeah, so a half step is the movement. You can also think of it like as a chromatic movement. Um, yeah. Then there's the idea of the whole step, which is the movement of two half steps. So that's C to D. And this is how a whole tone movement sounds. That's actually the whole tone scale. That's a scale based completely around whole steps. And then two other terms we're going to be using is root, which is the note that a chord is built off of, and tonic, which is the note that a scale is based off of. So the first ideas we want to talk about are intervals. Intervals are distances between notes. We give these intervals names to make it easier to talk about and make it easy to identify. So down here, you'll see that we have a set different intervals, and from left to right, once this little guy goes away, so we can actually look, we have U for unison, and that is the distance of 0 half step. We have the minor second, which is a distance of 1 half step. We have the major second, which is a distance of 2 half steps. We have the minor three, which is a distance of 3. And then it goes so on and so forth with the major third. And then we see the perfect fourth, the tritone, which is marked TT, the perfect fifth, the minor sixth, the major sixth, the minor sevenths, the major sevenths, and then the perfect eighth or octave. So there are many strategies that people kind of use to try to memorize these intervals. Learning intervals is really helpful for transcription because you don't need to be in front of the piano or mess around a bunch when you're in MuseScore trying to figuring out what's the next note. So if you hear something that's like, you might know that is a perfect fifth. And so some techniques, some people have perfect pitch, so they can just pull that interval out of nowhere, which is I don't have. That's ridiculous. Some people use something relative. So like for the perfect fifth, typically the Star Wars theme is brought to mind. That as a perfect fifth. Perfect fourth is Here Comes the Bride, I believe. And there's all sorts of interesting ones. Tritone is I think it's the Immigrant Song. So that note that the main this sound. So yeah, I would highly recommend looking up these ideas or making up your own to help you identify these intervals. So next idea we want to talk about are the idea of actually before I move on, just any questions about intervals? I will give it 5 seconds.
Okay, I have a question actually.
Yeah.
So, when you actually find the intervals, you say you use it relatively or through perfect pitch. Is relative something you have to train as well, like just being able to identify what interval it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think with relative pitch, it is a little bit of just it's memorization uh, in a different kind of way. So and that's why it's important. Like we use when we talk about relative pitch, we talk about song examples because those song examples can be memorized. And so when you're hearing a song, like you can hear, you can figure out, which is kind of like, and you would figure it out from there. So relative is usually always going to be relative to a note or a specific song or any sort of reference point you choose. If that answers your question.
Yep, that's good. Thanks.
Awesome, cool. Any more questions? I'll give like 5 long seconds. All right, cool. We'll move on. And of course, if any questions pop up along the way, just interject. So the next idea that we have are the idea of scales, and scales are a series of intervals that wrap back to a tonic. And we remember that word tonic is the note that a scale is based on. So a tonic is usually given a Roman numeral value of I or 1. And depending on the quality of the note, it will be either a capital I or a lowercase I. And we'll talk about why that is in a little bit. There are many scales, I say we're going to focus on 2 basic, but I believe we're only going to really be talking about the major scale for reference. The major scale is a 7-note scale with a pattern of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Major is usually given this happy stereotype, and with a C tonic, there's no sharps and flats. So a major scale you've heard is the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Now, the reason why the major scale can be played in any key, like that was A major, here's F major, E flat major, etc., is because of these patterns of whole and half steps. Bringing it back to C major, the distance between C and D is a whole step. The distance between D and E is a whole step as well. The distance between E and F is a half step. Remember, because there is no black key in between those 2 notes, so technically this is a half step. Then the distance between the F and the G is a whole step. The distance between the G and the A is a whole step. Distance between A and B is a whole step, and then B to C is a half step. And so when you apply that structure with any note as its basis, you can create a major scale. It's kind of like a template. So, I can go pick a random note like A flat, for example. And if I go whole, half, whole, half. So that's why we kind of know these as whole and half steps, because a scale is just a template with a note associated with it. And here are the major scales on all of the, so with every single white key as its tonic. So the C major, the D major, the E major, the F major, the F major, the G major, the A major, the B major, and then it would go back to the C major from there. You could see how often I practice my scales, which is not all that much. Practice your scales. They're really helpful. Okay, so any questions about scales before we move on? No? Okay. So the next idea I think about is the idea of chords. So chords are two or more notes that are played at the same time. Chords are typically built around the triad, or three notes played at the same time. And there are four types of triads. There's the major triad, the minor triad, the diminished triad, and the augmented triad. So we'll get into these. The major chords are chords that are made up of a root, a major third above the root, and a perfect fifth above the root. So here we have our root, which is C in this case. A major third up is E, and then a perfect fifth above is G. A major chord. Major chords are kind of given a happy stereotype, and major chords are written in quite a few ways. You'll see a uppercase M, a uppercase major, uppercase Roman numeral. So if you remember back when we were talking about the tonic, the I was uppercase and lowercase, and that was dependent on whether it was major or, and spoiler alert, minor. So you can use an uppercase Roman numeral to denote that specific chord is major. And you could also use an uppercase version of the root. So you could use a uppercase C to show that you have a C major chord. Hold on. Excuse me.
I just wanted to interject. I think it might be helpful to explain what like a major third versus what a minor third is, just for people who may not know, and versus what an augmented whatever interval.
We already went over those intervals right here. Right?
Okay.
Yeah, because the minor third, yeah, it's okay. I guess, but it is good to review. So thank you for bringing it to my attention. Yeah, so the difference between a minor third and a major third is just simply is how many half steps there are. So a minor third has a space of 3 half steps. So, and then a major third has a movement of 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a major third interval. But thank you for bringing that up, Kiki, because I did a bad example. I heard a interjection.
Yeah, thank you.
So wait, so the minor third has a space of 3 half steps, and a major third has 4 half steps?
Yes.
Okay, that's kind of weird to me.
Right. Yeah, it's just a naming convention. I think another way to think about it, there's so many different ways to think about music theory. You can think of it relative to many different things. When I think intervals, I think of it in regards to the major scale. So in like right here, if you look, we're in C major. All of the major intervals are in the C major scale. So you have the unison, the major 2, the major 3, the perfect 4th, the sorry, the major sixth, the major seventh, and the perfect eighth, the octave. So that's how I think about it, and then everything else is just, you know, a editation of that. So like the minor second is, you know, like a lower version of the major second. And the same thing with the minor third and the and so on. I guess one thing I did fail to mention is the tritone, why it's named so uniquely. And the reason why is because our Western musical scale is made up of a chromatic scale of 12 notes. And so the tritone is given a special place because it's right in the middle of our chromatic scale. And you can divide everything in between that into thirds. And it almost sounds like, so that's why the tritone is named differently. If that answers if I cleared up any confusion about intervals. All right, cool. We're gonna move on now. So onto the minor chord. So the minor triad is made up of a root, so in this case C, a minor third, which is 3 half steps, 1, 2, 3, and then a perfect fifth above, which in this case is G. And minor chords are given kind of this sad, almost dark stereotype. And it's notated in quite a few ways. You'll see a lowercase m, a lowercase minor. You'll see lowercase Roman numerals. So, for example, I played a C minor. You'll see a lowercase c when denoting, a lowercase 1 if I were in the key of C or whatever. Lowercase root, you would see a lowercase c. I think I confused my words a bit. I apologize, but are we following along? Cool. Silence is good. Maybe we'll see. Next, we have the diminished chord. So triads. This is a triad made up of a root, a minor third above, and a tritone above. So this sounds like this. So a root, we got C, a minor third above, which is E flat, and then a tritone above, which is a G flat. So what's cool about diminished chords is that they kind of slide really nicely into each other. So you can go like almost like infinitely go up, and it just never feels resolved. So it's a fun technique to be used, and it's used a lot in like jazz and jazz compositions and jazz improvisation.
Hey, I'm wondering if it's possible to lower your keyboard input volume.
I could try.
Okay, if not, it's fine. It's just hard to hear if you talk over it.
Let's see. I'm gonna try just bringing it down a little bit and see how that sounds.
Okay, and if that doesn't work, it's fine to just like keep on playing, but then like talk after it.
Okay.
Oh, that's a lot better.
Is it like interjecting? Like it's like, is it still too loud?
It's a little loud, but it's fine if you just to talk.
I'll turn it down just a little bit more,
okay.
And then we should be fine. Okay.
Okay.
So what I was saying was that the diminished chords sound really cool going into each other. It's a very common technique to find in jazz improvisation, to kind of walk to a different chord. It also sounds really good a major to a major a half step away. So it's like a, or like a. So it's a good transition chord, and it's notated quite a few ways. You can have a degree symbol or the little letters dim next to a lowercase Roman numeral. So as you can see, we have a lowercase the 3 Roman numeral with a degree symbol, or lowercase 3 with a dim next to it. We have a degree or a dim next to a lowercase root, which will have a F degree sign. Oh, I guess an F degree sign, and then an F dim, or you'll see this minor flat 5. You'll usually see that in like the jazz world is the minor flat 5, which is a different way of spelling the diminished. So that's the diminished chord. Moving on, we have the augmented chord. The augmented chord is probably the least common of the four, as it doesn't really appear in a lot of traditional scales, but it does exist and it is used. It's a triad made up of a root. That's supposed to say a major third above, my bad. So a root, a major third above, and an augmented fifth, which wasn't put on the sheet, but an augmented version of anything is a sharp of that note. So an augmented fifth will be a sharp 5, which is a G sharp. And augmented chords are really interesting because you can really kind of resolve that into the major chord with the same tonic. So right now I am playing a C augmented chord, and then I can resolve that to a C major chord. So there's quite some interesting sounds going on like that. But it's notated quite a few ways. You'll see a plus sign or an aug next to an uppercase Roman numeral. So like a uppercase 3 in Roman numerals right here, or with a plus, a 3 and aug, or a plus or an aug next to an uppercase root. This is supposed to be an uppercase F, but an F plus, which is just so happens to also be my grade in my classes, or F augmented, or you could see a sharp 5 next to a uppercase thing. And that's usually seen in some jazz stuff. So that's the augmented chord. And those are the four kind of main chords. And this is going to build out a little bit more. But do we have any questions regarding these chords so far? Do augmented chords usually resolve well too? Yeah, they do. Augmented chords, they resolve well to the tonic. I think there's other things you could do. So that right there is the movement between the C augmented and the A flat major, which sounds good to me. There's a lot of possibilities. So yeah, the augmented chord can definitely be used to do some resolutions. It's just not super common, I think, at least in modern like pop theory and stuff like that. You won't hear too many augmented chords, or at least they can be confused for other things, like maybe a chord extension or something like that. But yeah, moving on though, if nobody has any more questions. All right. So here are the chords that you can find in major and minor. So up here we have the major scale, which is made up of, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And if we build just going to the third of the tonic of these notes, we can build our chords. So from C, if we go up a third, just a third, like a generic third, like 3 notes from it in relative to its scale, we land on E. And if we go up to the 5th relative to that note, relative to the key as well, you reach G. If that makes sense. I don't think I did a good job of explaining that. Okay, I'm not hearing any protesting. So we're gonna move on. So next we see the D minor, and the reason why it's D minor is because in C major, which we are in, there are no sharps and flats. So when we build our chord, which is built of a third and a fifth with D as our base, when we hit the third, we hit F natural, which is a minor third from D, and then we hit our perfect fifth. I hope I have everyone still. Next, we have our E minor, which is the same issue. If you build a third up, you get the G natural instead of the G sharp, which would make it major. So the G natural makes it a minor third, and then now we have a minor. Then we have our F, and this scale allows it to be major. We have our G, which allows it to be major, which the scale allows it to be major. We have our A minor, which the scale allows to be A minor. And then we have the B diminished, which the reason for that is because in the scale of C, we don't have any sharps or flats. So if you build a triad off of thirds, off of B, you land on D, and D is a minor third away from B, and then you land on F, which is a tritone away from B. If we wanted that to be major, we would have to sharp the third to make it a D sharp, and sharp the fifth to make it an F sharp. But unfortunately, we don't have any sharps or flats, so we just play B, D, F. And then finally, C. I hope that you were able to follow along with that. The same can be applied to any scale, such as minor. Minor has a different set of whole and half steps. So they lead to different chords within their scale. One thing that I should note about the minor scale is the idea, and I think we get into this in the next one. Okay, no, actually, we'll come back to it. So, anyone lost about those chord stuff so far before we move on? I want to nip anything in the butt as early as possible. Okay, so we're gonna move on. So the next idea, it's a lot simpler than all that, is the idea of chord inversions. So we have our C major, C, E, G, C, E, G. And what we can do with chords is we can move the notes to different positions, but it will stay the same chord. And these are what we call inversions. So in what we call root position, all the notes are stacked nicely on top of each other into thirds. In first inversion, we move the root and we bring it up. So now we get the third on the bottom. And when you look at chord notation, you'll see it as C/E, like C over E, or C with an E in the bass. So the C major chord, but with the E in the bass. And then the second inversion, you move the E up an octave, and then you have the fifth at the bottom. And then that's notated with a C/G, which is C over G, which is a C major chord, but with a G in the bass. And now the reason why we talk about chord inversions is that chord inversions can add interesting flavor to to a song with its chords. So if you notice, if I were to go to that sounds fine. That feels conclusionary. So if I go, that sounds fine. It sounds nice, conclusionary. I could leave my hands free and it'd be fine. But if my bass hand was supposed to lands on an E instead of the C, but still play the C triad, so it doesn't sound all that complete, and you can use that to your advantage to keep the song moving, to not let the momentum stop. Right? Because if you're in root position, you're basically implying that's it. There's nothing else more to hear. But when you add in C over E, C first inversion, it kind of like is like, but if you can imagine a sentence, so it's like, if you were to do this projection, it'd be da 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 da. That's your period. But if you did it with the first inversion, it's like da 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 da. But also, so there's little interesting things you can do with chord inversions. What's also interesting about the second inversion is that it is treated like a dominant. And this is where we now talk about the tonic dominant relationship. Before we move on though, is everyone cool with inversions? Okay, so now we're going to move on to the tonic dominant relationship. So what this entails is that the tonic, you can imagine that as home. This is where the harmonic motion wants to resolve, and it's usually the one in the scale. So in C major, it's the first note of that scale, which is C. So C major, it's C major. And it's notated with that capital I if it lands on a major, or that lowercase I if it lands on a minor. There is also some theory that suggests that the 6 can also work as a resolution, but it leaves a melancholic feel. How that sounds is like this. Or rather than. So what you're hearing is that little thing that's causing all that dissonance is what we call the dominant. The dominant is the chord that has the most tension with the tonic, and it's always going to be the 5th of the scale. So in C major, it's going to be G major, G major. So if we do a C major followed by a G major, we're going to want to come back to C major. And the dominant always wants to resolve to the tonic. And something you'll also know if you are familiar with minor, the 5th, the minor scale, the 5th in the minor scale is actually, we got someone to admit. Okay. The 5th in the minor scale is minor. So the resolution isn't as strong. Dun, dun, dun. Someone muted everybody. Okay. So
Sorry, that was an accident.
it's all good. So in minor, we have this minor 5, which doesn't really resolve as good to the tonic. So it sounds like this. So in minor, you can change the minor 5 to a major 5 for a much stronger resolution. And so sometimes this tonic dominant relationship is called the 5-1 relationship, or the perfect cadence. And what the most helpful thing about the tonic dominant relationship is that it can help you figure out what is the key of things, rather than just aimlessly following it around. So if you hear this, that's like definitely this note is the key, which in this case is C, because C is easy, and that's why I keep playing in C. So that's the tonic dominant relationship. Any questions regarding that? I'm sure there'll be at least one. No?
Is there like practice, like a way to practice this? Because if you listen to pieces that are like big and orchestrally, it's often hard to hear chords in them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It gets easier with experience as well. Once you like develop the skill of like picking apart, let's say, just the bass line, or just the flutes, or just the melody, it gets easier to like recognize the types of chords and intervals, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so like looking at pieces, listening to all sorts of different music, you can hear how people manipulate this tonic dominant relationship in order to move around and stuff like that. So it is stuff that comes with practice. I know that there are some available resources online that I should have included in here. But there's like I think it's like musictheory.com, which is a site where you can play like these, they're not really games, they're more like challenges that'll help you develop pitch detection, interval training, chord training, etc. It really like helps to train your musicianship, your ear. So I'll look into that and just and I'll make sure to include that in my next slides to talk about. Do you have any examples where we know the chords already, like just offhand? I'm glad you brought that up, Kritin, because I actually do have an example later on. I want to kind of get through all the theory garbage first, because theory sucks, and we just want to get it out of the way. And then we can, I'll show you a good example of it. Okay. So next is the idea of counterpuntal motion. I forgot how long these slides are. Oh boy. So counterpunch, I should have gotten a good example of this. You know what? I'll come back to this some other time because I want to include better examples for this. But it is helpful when it comes to writing voice parts and stuff like that. So I'll brush upon this subject next next time. So next thing I do want to talk about is the idea of chord extensions. And so chord extensions are basically additional notes based off of the triad. And these can add a lot of flavor to your chords. So there are quite a few of them. We have our sevenths, our ninths, our 11ths, 13ths, susses, and adds. So with these number ones, it's basically adding notes relative to the tonic. So or the root, sorry. So like the sevenths, you want to add the seventh note from it. So from the root. So for C, that would be B. And it's a very beautiful sound. The minor seventh's one of the, is a favorite. Oh, sorry, the major sevenths. You also have the minor seventh, which has a very jazzy quality to it. You have the ninth. You have the 11th, which sounds, you have this, and then you have the 13th. And you can sharp and flat these ones as necessary and get some really interesting textures going. You have your suspended ones. Major 7 sounds like the chord we use in a couple of Minecraft songs. Yeah, I know there's if you remember in our third movement, there's this part that goes. This chord right here, I made it on my a major 7th. So yeah, major 7ths are beautiful. Susses. So what that is you remove the third and you play whatever note at the notes. If you just see a sus by itself, it implies the fourth. And if you see a sus2, that means remove the third and play the second. And that can, and they're called sus because it's suspension. So if I were to play a C sus4, that's a C, an F, and a G. So it sounds like. And what's helpful about these chords is that you can use it to like build up suspense until it resolves to the actual major. It's super fun. And then there's the sus2, which also does it to a lesser extent. And then there's the add4, which is to add the fourth in addition to the third, which sounds more clusterish. So yeah, And chord extensions can be layered on top of each other. Here I have this nasty chord that I didn't even test. It's a C major 7, sus4, sharp 9. Because we have our major 7s, which is our B. And then we have our sus4, so we remove the E. But then we also have a sharp 9. Oh, so I was playing it wrong. So it's actually... Yeah, so you can stack these chord extensions on top of each other. And then once people get a good grasp of these chords, you can create sort of these chord progressions, which are kind of the passing between these chords to create these kind of structures and phrases. And so this is the motion between the tonic, which remember was the 1, and sometimes the 6, to the predominant, which is kind of just like the middle space, the like the added fluff. So that's like a da, 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 da. And right, you're just kind of moving into space. You can just kind of go aimlessly until you come to the dominant, and then the dominant comes back to the tonic. And the predominant exists of the second, the third, the fourth, and the 7th, and the dominant is the 5, and sometimes the 7. Sometimes you can get away with that. So a couple of common chord progressions you might hear. There's the 2-5-1, which is a common jazz progression. So you start with a minor 2, and then to the 5th, major 5th, then to the tonic. Typically, it's done with more gusto with the chord extensions. Stuff like that. You have your your 1-5-6-4, which is the common pop progression. So you can think of what is that one? Let It Be. Mother Mary comes to me, sharing words of wisdom, right? Or Don't Stop Believing has the same chord progression. You have Pachelbel's canon progression, which is this, you might have heard it. That's that 1. You have your 1-6-4-5, which you hear in a lot of doo-wop songs from like the 60s. You have this one where they just kind of just go between the 4 and the 1. And that's usually done in like those sappy songs. And then there's a very common video game chord progression, which is the 4-5-3-6. Which can just be looped endlessly because it never resolves. So yeah. So here I had some examples of relevant media with the chord progressions. I'm going to just go ahead and skip this section due to time restraints, but yeah, these are examples of these chord progressions. Now, using these chords using this chord theory to actually arrange and stuff, there's so much you can do. So like, for example, one of the things you can do is chord sheets. So there's a possibility that the song you might want to do already has chords out there, especially if you're doing like a musical song from a Disney film or something like that. So if you have access to the chords of the song, you can use your knowledge of music theory to identify harmony. And I'll have an example of all these coming up. Then we have the idea of horizontal and vertical harmonic analysis. So these are methods to find out chords from sheet music. So vertical chord identifying is identifying the chord through the triad. So that's sitting down and looking at the notes vertically. And then there's horizontal analysis, which is figuring out the chords through the melody, which is definitely a lot more tough. And then you have the best thing with chord theory is enriching your harmonic textures. So adding chord extensions that aren't present in the original version can create a new atmosphere that can make your arrangement unique. So like Derek said, when I added that major seventh in that one part of the Minecraft arrangement, da 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 do do, and it's like, actually technically it's a F9 because the melody plays the G, but the chord is being played in the orchestra is a F7. Ha, that's cool. So it's actually a major 9 that I'm playing. Oh, that's cool. Huh. So yeah, you can really enrich your harmonic textures using these chord extensions. So here's a little example of everything. Here I pulled some chords for the Pokemon theme song, right? So the chords are A minor, G, A minor, G, F, C, C, D, E. Right? So using the chords, I can make a simple transcription of the piece. So I have my A minor. And then so on and so forth. And you can actually hear the example of the 5-1 relationship right there, because you hear this E and it wants to resolve back to A minor. I don't think these are right notes that I picked for the first 4 bars, but I think you get the idea. So that's how you can apply using chord sheets to your own arrangement. And of course, I could totally doll this up, but this is just an example of just a simple transcription that you can pull from chord sheets. As far as horizontal and vertical analysis goes, horizontal analysis is quite straightforward. If you look in the bass section of the staff, we have a E, a G sharp, and a B. And through that, I could tell it's in the E major. That's an example of a vertical analysis. Horizontal is a little bit more difficult. So in the treble clef, you see, which is a little section I took from Celeste. So we have this E, E, B, F, G, and it's your job to figure out which ones are the main notes. So we hear this E, this B, and F sharp, and G. If I play them all at the same time, it doesn't really sound correct. But if I remove the F sharp and treat it as like a passing tone, we're left with a E major chord. So that's one way of doing a horizontal analysis. And just from the melody, you can figure out that that this is an E major. Then finally, enriching harmonic textures. This is just a tiny piece I just threw together real fast. So with basic chords, you'll get something that's, reasonable. So reasonable, that's fine. It's unoffensive. But adding these chord extensions can really bring life to your piece. So here is one where I changed the F to an F9. I added some suspension and some additional additions. Oops. Ugh. So you can really just bring a different idea and a different texture to your musical world through these chord extensions. So to wrap it up, there are plenty of resources out there that will talk about music theory in a far more in depth and entertaining way than I do. And so I would highly recommend you check out channels such as 8-Bit Music Theory, which is I'm sure most of you are familiar with, which is a YouTube channel that does deep dives into the theory of different video game soundtracks. You have the Ongaku concept, which is another video game theory channel with a preference towards Japanese video games. You have Adam Neely, who's kind of the quintessential music theory channel for that explores musical experimental harmony and rhythm. He's a bass player, so and a jazz player, so he has a lot of really interesting theory. There is the channel Fanfare, formerly Video Game Score Fanfare, which does a lot of analysis on motifs and structure, as well as like the emotional aspects of music. Recently, he changed to analyzing pop music, so there might be less game stuff, but he did a really beautiful essay on Celeste. I would recommend looking at. And then there is film score analysis, which creates these cool reductions of great works in the movie sphere and analyzes them within the context of the movie. It's cool. There's a lot of resources out there of passionate people who put so much work into their stuff, and usually they face a lot of copyright issues. But yeah, like check out. There's so much theory out there, and make it so much more digestible. What did Critton say? He said, by the way, I asked my music teacher for additional music theory exercises, and she said her daughter/son, also music teachers low, recommended this app called Tenuto and downloaded it. It's pretty cool. Yeah, I have heard of Tenuto. I don't have an iOS device, so I can't, haven't been able to use it, but I have also heard other theory teachers swear by Tenuto. It's basically like it's musictheory.net. It's like musictheory.net, but on your phone. So yeah, Tenuto, if you have, is a great mobile option. Musictheory.net also works well. I think they do have a mobile website, so you can access it like that. Oh, there you go. Thank you, Crit, and you're being awesome. He's posted a link to musictheory.net as well as to Tenuto, because apparently I guess they work hand in hand. So, all right, let's take a small breather to get out of the theory world. Do we have any remaining lingering questions? Ooh. I don't listen to Chainsmokers, so I feel really stupid right now. But I guess the question was, what about the chord progression on every Chainsmoker song? I wish I could answer that. Oh, really? They use the same chord progression? A lot of things use the same chord progression. You hear this, or the one a lot. This ugh, it's been a while. So 5, 6, 4, and 1. So it's the 1, 5, 6, 4. So maybe. So yeah, it's interesting. It's we just only use like 30 chord progressions nowadays. Anyways, I'm gonna transition now into the brass section. I don't want to screw over the brass section. So let's go ahead and get into it. So the brass section in Intermission Orchestra is made up of French horns, trumpets, trombones, and euphoniums, which are pictured from upper left to bottom right. A couple of terms that we're going to talk about. A brass instrument are instruments that require buzzing into a mouthpiece to create sound, and they're typically made of brass, although there are plastic versions that are bad. But typically they're made of brass. The mouthpiece is a removable, usually metal cup that the player buzzes into. And then the idea of buzzing is the method to produce sound on the brass instrument. And that is I have to do this away from my mic because I don't want to spit in it. It's a or they like bring their lips together and go, and that's how they make their sound. I saw a chat pop up for a moment. Sax is technically a woodwind instrument because it uses a reed to make its sound. the brass, that's what's funny. It's because you don't have to, because yeah, the saxophone is made of brass, but being made of brass isn't what makes a brass instrument a brass instrument. It's the act of buzzing into the mouthpiece that denotes a brass instrument, rather than blowing into a reed or blowing into a pitch hole like on the flute. So yeah, but that's a good question. Uh, then we have the bell, which is the part of the instrument where the sound escapes. So going back to the previous slide, the bells are right here. It's that top part where all the noise comes out of. We have the idea of the valves, which are pistons that are pressed down by the player to increase the length of piping. And we have crooks, which are small bends in the tubings that can be adjusted and removed for cleaning purposes typically. So how these instruments work is that they utilize this thing called the harmonic series. So within one length of tubing, only notes that appear on the harmonic series are able to be produced. And valves and slides change the length of those tubes, so the instrument can play all the notes on the Western scale. However, since the harmonic series gets tighter and tighter, the higher up it goes, the higher the note, the harder it is to control those notes. So right here we have the harmonic series. The notes in black are the notes that appear in the harmonic series that also appear in our traditional 12-tone scale, which is a low C, then C, then G, then C, then E, then G. Then we get this not exactly flat, flat, B flat, then C, then so on and so forth. So that's why we have these valves and these crooks, because it changes the length of the piping, meaning we can access different notes, different harmonic series. So to kind of put it into perspective, um, before the application of valves onto the trumpet, uh, you could play songs, but only within one harmonic series. So this is an example called Revel, which is a military song that is played using only one harmonic series, which means you could play it on the trumpet without ever having to press in any of the valves. Let me just skip ahead. Can you hear that? I think that might be a little loud for you guys. I can't hear any of that, so. So yeah, that's an example of a song that only uses one harmonic series. You guys heard that, right? Because I couldn't hear it. All right, cool. So I'm going to move on. So the first instrument we're going to talk about is the French horn. The French horn is personally my favorite brass instrument and also one of my favorite instruments to write for and listen to. The French horn is a F instrument, meaning it sounds a perfect fifth lower than it is written. Some French horns are in B flat, which makes it a major second lower than written. Typically, you don't really have to worry about that though, because we only have F horns, I believe. The quality of this, if I were to give this a personality, it has a very noble sound quality, and it's very powerful both in terms of dynamic range as well as like emotion. I think the French horn is probably an intrinsically emotional instrument. It's incredible. I love the French horn. It is considered one of the hardest instruments to play, technically, due to the fact that the mouthpiece is so small. In fact, it's the smallest mouthpiece of any of the brass instruments. And it is typically muted with the hand cupped into the bell of the instrument. Now, due to the fact that how the instrument is held, which is typically like on the knee of the player, the bell faces away from the audience. So that causes the sound to delay. Players tend to play ahead of the conductor in order to compensate for that delay. And because of the fact that the sound has to go behind the player and then come back before the audience hears it, the attack, which is like the initial hit of the note, is softer. So when making passages for the French horn, it's best to avoid fast passages. Otherwise, the sound will become muddy and distorted, and it would be hard to hear. Typically, slower passages work really well with the French horn. And then its written range is a C2 to a C6. So I'm going to show you an example from Tchaikovsky's Symphony Number 5, Movement 2. This is a beautiful, beautiful part, and I wish I could hear it, but my headphones won't allow me. So I'll just let it do its thing, and you guys get to enjoy it while I just stand in awkward silence for a minute. All right, cool. Ooh, I had an auto stop. Nice. Thinking ahead. Yeah, it's beautiful. I love this example. I think it really also goes to show you how beautiful repeating notes can sound the on the instrument. You miss classical music. It's still there, bruh. Just Google it. I like to listen to the music while I'm like building in Minecraft or whatever. Anyways, moving on. Next, we have the trumpet. Now, the trumpet is usually a B flat instrument, meaning it sounds a major second lower than written. Some are in C, making it in concert pitch. And in the intermission orchestra, we split our trumpets into two parts. The trumpet has a very fanfare-ish sound, and almost sometimes a singing sound voice. It has incredible fortes, and it's popular all across the musical spectrum. You'll hear it in classical music, you'll hear it in jazz, you'll hear it in Latin music, you'll hear it everywhere, because the trumpet is just such a versatile instrument in its sound. It takes the most advantage out of mutes, which we'll talk about later. And it's an incredible instrument for fast and slow passages. And so its written range is an A3 to D6. Oh boy, come on. There we go. So here's an example from Haydn's Trumpet Concerto in E flat major. You'll hear a lot of, if I remember correctly, oh, I don't remember how it sounds. Oh well, I'll just play it for you guys. So that's the trumpet. The trumpet has that very jumpy, almost playful quality to it. But of course, the trumpet can have a little more solemn things if you think about that. That song. So it does. It's a versatile instrument. You can do a lot with the trumpet. Next is the trombone, which I think is a slept-on instrument. It is in concert pitch, and it has a much sweeter, more melismatic instrument, and that's just due to the fact of how it is designed compared to the other instruments. Rather than having a bunch of valves on the instruments to extend the tubing, the instrument uses a long slide to extend the tubing. So it's kind of like just like a brute force method to make the tubings smaller and longer and shorter to reach those different harmonic series. Because of the fact that it slides, it has some really fun glissandos. So it's definitely worth writing. And it has a warm sound, but with a little bit more attack than the French horn. Hold on. So that's why I think it's a slept-on instrument, because it has a very interesting and unique role in the orchestra, where you can have something that's warmer than the trumpet, but not as like say fluid and I guess I want to say like melted cheese. That's like how I want to visualize the French horn. But yeah, that's the trombone. The trombone's great. And faster passages are harder than it is on valved instruments, but they are doable because they're just sliding all over the place. And its range is E2 to B flat 4, which you can see here. So for this, I'm going to be showing you Rimsky-Korsakov's Trombone Concerto. I think I'm going to have to look at the music to remember what this was, but I'll just play it for you. All right, so that's the trombone. I actually can't remember how that one goes, so I can't really comment on it. But yeah, moving on. Next, we have the euphonium, which is a instrument in concert pitch, which has very punchy staccatos and a very punchy lower end. You can be used as like I guess, art substitute for a tuba. And but it also has an incredibly sweet and beautiful higher register. This one uses valves to extend the tubing, which means it can be played just as quickly as a trumpet because it uses valves, which is really, so it's good for slow and low sections as well as fast sections as well. And its concert range is B flat 1, which is low. That's what this is right here, to B flat 4. So that's a nice range. Yeah, so here's an example of the euphonium. I do want to give a little bit of context to this first. This is a arrangement of the African slave song Down to the River to Pray. And I think it's probably one of the most beautiful arrangements I've heard. And it's almost entirely on the euphonium, so on a euphonium ensemble. I wish I could hear it. that's a tuba right there, by the way. Those little guys on the left are euphonium. All right. Yeah. It's pretty. If I remember, yeah, I wish I could have heard it again. I love it. I love that arrangement. So moving on from the instruments themselves, these instruments are capable of all sorts of articulations. Of course, they can make staccatos, which they do by quickly tonguing, kind of like similar to those to the woodwinds, where they kind of block the airflow with their tongue along the way. So like a, I'm gonna try this. Sorry, if that makes sense. They can do tenutos. Glissando are also possible on trombone. Glissandos can be slid, or they can be individual notes, which is a little bit more difficult, but it is possible on the trombone. And then on valves, glissandos can be slid by transitioning between the fingerings. Note glissandos are possible too. And when I say note glissandos, I mean like a chromatic one. You have your accents, which of course are very, very, very powerful on these instruments, and the forte piano, which is probably most striking on these instruments. So a couple of different techniques that these instrumentalists use. They can, of course, tonguing, like double, triple, and flutter tongue. If you don't remember flutter tongue, that's when they roll the tongue while they're blowing like a sound. They can do trills. So trills on the trombone are like quick glissandos, so they're like moving it back and forth. Ooh, I almost knocked over my computer. Trills on valved instruments are more solid in their pitch difference when they go like, because they are going just between two fingerings really quickly. There are pitch bends that are possible on these instruments. One technique that is used is having the hand inside the bell, which is a sort of muting option that you can do. And so basically changing the position of the hand in the bell can create different pitch bends or even a muted effect. So one of these techniques that is unique to the French horn is the stopped horn, where a player inserts the right hand as far as it can into the bell, which creates a soft, smooth, but also nasally sound. And that's notated with a plus above the note. Anytime you see mute notation, you'll see pluses, and then you'll see O's to represent open, which means like normally without the mute. And then vibrato is also possible. For an example of stopped horn, I'm going to be showing you Rimsky-Korsakov's Capriccio Espagnol, and I'm going to make sure to zoom in so you can see how it looks in the sheet music. So right here is the French horn part. You can see these are open, and then it's muted with the plus signs, which gives it a really different, unique texture. And it plays a second time. I'm gonna give it like 20 seconds or 10 seconds. Yeah, all right. So stopped horn can be a really interesting effect, and it's not an extended technique. So, don't be afraid to write these into your scores, and you can make it some interesting effects. So next we have the mutes. Now the mutes are things that you insert into the bell of the instrument, and they can, create different timbral effects. And they're most commonly used in jazz performance, but they have been called for in the classical sphere. These are available for the trumpet and the trombone, but they're most commonly for the trumpet. And if you see in parentheses a number, that's how many mutes we have inside of the intermission orchestra for the trumpet. So you can keep that in mind if you want to write for these mutes. So first we have the straight mute, and the straight mute is made of cardboard, metal, and wood. The cardboard mutes have a stuffy sound, while metal mutes have a piercing, bright sound. And there's some made for euphoniums, but they require some setup time. And I'll talk about writing for the mutes in a bit, and show you some audio examples in a bit as well. We have the cup mute, which we have two of. These are made of cardboard, and they give a soft, muffled sound. We have the Harmon mute or the wah wah mute, and we have four of these. They're made of metal, and they can be played with the stem or without the stem, or even like with the stem in different positions. There's the wah wah effect, which occurs when you cover the sound hole and release it. That's where you get that wah 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 sound from. We have the plunger mute, which kind of works like it kind of sounds like the wah wah part of the Harmon mute. This is made of just straight up a toilet plunger. It's made of rubber, and it's held in the left hand of the player, and which allows for that wah wah sound without the metallic timbre of the Harmon mute. There's the bucket, which we only have one plunger mute for some reason. And then we have the bucket mute, which is made of cardboard and cotton and muffles the sound. We don't have any of these. But technically, you could call for anything to be mutes. Paper bowls, pie tins, hats, stands, etc. They're like, if you can cover the hole, you could use it as a mute. So, there's some but that's kind of delving into extended techniques. As far as I know, Kritten, we have not used any mutes in our pieces before, but they're not uncommon to be called for. And these the brass players, the trumpet players, love playing with their mutes. So if you write mutes for them, they will love you. So here's some audio examples of a bunch of different mutes. I'm gonna give you a palate cleanser just so you know how the trumpet sounds like by itself. Oh no, I did a stupid. Whoopsie. Sorry, guys. Next, we have the straight mutes. Next, we have the cup mute. Next, we have the Harmon mute with the stem in. Oh, something I forgot to mention about the cup mute is that the distance that the cup is from the bell can be adjusted with the cup mute. So anyways, this is the Harmon mute with stem.
Okay.
If you saw that he had his stem actually out a little bit too. And this is the Harmon without the stem. Here's the plunger, which is also, the wah wah effect of the Harmon mute. Oh wait, I didn't put the timestamp. Oh man, I wish I could. Here, maybe I can just quickly find it real fast. Or he's not talking about it.
This in the sound. What I'm doing.
I hope you were able to hear it. Here's the bucket mute. And just to get an idea of how creative you can get with these mutes, here's someone using a coconut shell as a mute. Oh, or I just neglected and totally forgot to put
Somebody
it again.
took a coconut shell, and I understand some of the early guys in New Orleans did this. They'd take a half of a coconut shell and use that as a mute. So that's one way.
You could use anything as a mute, really. But yeah. So when you're writing for mutes, mute changes are notated using text such as like Harmon with stem or cut mute. And keep in mind that it does take time to place in mutes and remove them quietly. So if you do want them to use to transition between mutes or add a mute or remove a mute, you should give them some rest so they can remove the mute without making a ton of noise. And apparently Kiki said yes, that there was a piece in Intermission that used it before. She says, one of the songs from the Final Fantasy medley, if anyone remembers. So.
Oh, is that what it was? I couldn't remember like.
Oh, that was Critten. Sorry,
song it was.
That was
Don't worry,
Critten.
I'll take credit.
I didn't read it correctly.
Oh, that's all good.
Oh wait, I'm totally misreading. It says random aside. As soon as the trumpet guy started on the F, it reminded me of one of the songs from the Final Fantasy medley. If anyone remembers, I couldn't hear any of it because for some reason my audio is all screwed up. But I'll take your word for it.
It might have been that we did play Final Fantasy medley, and I do remember there around that time we did have a trumpet mute, but I don't remember exactly. But oh well.
Okay, thank you. So mutes that can be toggled with the left hand, like the plunger mute, does have its own notation similar to like the stopped horn, and that is using the plus to mean using the mute, and then the O meaning to not use the mute. So here's how it would look in like MuseScore right here. So there's plenty of extended techniques. You can sing while you play the instrument. You can get air sounds. If you do mouthpiece only, you'll get squeaking sound. You can detune the instrument by using the crooks on the instrument to make it a little flat or a little sharp. You can do valve clicks, which is when they like push in the valves really hard. There are multiphonics are possible on these instruments, but they're very difficult, more so than they are on the woodwinds. So they're not recommended. Microtones are also possible, and that's usually achieved by compressing the valves halfway. There's like smacking the mouthpiece or the instrument. Typically, you don't want to have them smack the mouthpiece with the instrument with the inside the instrument because that could get it stuck, and that is not good. So be careful when you're writing stuff like that. There's pedal tones, which I'll show you an example of. They're basically playing the fundamental note of the harmonic series. And there are alternate fingerings as well if you want a specific sound. So here's an example of pedal tone if I remember to actually put in the timestamp.
Do this for a second. We're going to play a C. I'm going to show you a C and then the pedal that exists below it. It's an actual real note. It's part of the harmonic series. So as you see, I'm pretty much...
So yeah, pedal tones are a way of getting deeper deeper notes. And yeah, that's kind of the brass section. I neglected to include a part where you can talk about what they're used for. So I'll just kind of talk about it. It's that the brass section can be used as a main melodic sound, big brassy fanfare, of course. You can use them in isolation. I know that a lot of modern video game music really likes to use the French horn in isolation. You could also use them to build up simple harmonic stuff. You don't want to go into the extended chords like we talked about, like the sevenths and ninths and all that, because the instruments are too dissonant in order to make those chords sound lovely. But fifths and fourths being played over whole notes sound incredible and can really add a lot to your piece. The brass section is a powerhouse, and it is a very versatile tool that you can really add a lot of flavor into your pieces with it. So anyways, in the next lecture, by the next lecture, I encourage you to listen to the pieces I've included in the PowerPoint, especially the classical ones. We'll be discussing the choir and the keyboard at our next meeting. We'll also be discussing MuseScore further and talking about anything I'm neglected to talk about prior, as well as stuff, and especially in regards to formatting and exporting the score, because one of the most important things you as an as an arranger have to do is also make sure your scores look good so people can actually play them well. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Kiki in, well, not IRL anymore, I guess, but over Facebook Messenger. And yeah, so that's kind of it. If you guys have any questions, you know, we're here to answer.
Yeah, thanks guys for coming. I know that was a lot of information, especially the music theory part. And yeah, like Daniel said, don't hesitate to talk to any one of us about anything music related and whatnot.
Yeah. So do we have any questions before we go? No? All right. Also, I'll give you guys like 5 seconds to copy the link that Kritten posted into the group chat, so you can see the trumpet part that we used. All right. Well, it's always nice being here. We actually ended early relative to when we started, so that's great. But I'll see you guys next week, hopefully. All right. Stay safe. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Mhm.
Thank you.